Let me show you this picture. There it is of yourself. You
Yeah.
pumped your fists in the Commons when the Chancellor announced the new national living wage. Now you claim it's a magnet for migrants. What changed?
No. I said it will become a magnet because as it rises, it will be a very good thing for people to want to come over here to actually work because they believe they'll be able to earn a higher wage than they would get in their own country.
So if we...
I am wholly in favour of a rise to the minimum wage because I believe over the period of time that what has happened amongst businesses is that they've got around paying lower wages. The government's had to step in through things like working tax credits.
I know the argument. Would you
So
still
I've
be in
been very much
favour
in
of it
favour
if
of
we
it.
stayed in the
Yes,
EU?
absolutely.
That
I'm in
wouldn't
favour of it.
change,
I'm in
even
favour.
though it would be a magnet for migrants.
I'm in favour of it because it's the best way you can help drive the wages up. But I have to tell you, if we stay in the EU, it will become a magnet for people to come in here, and it will lead to huge problems. The point that I made on Tuesday this week was that, as we've seen already, lots of people from the EU tend to come in. The Bank of England report was very clear about this. The vast majority of people coming into the EU from the European Union into the UK, they actually tend to be low-skilled. They tend to be ones taking a high proportion of those low-skilled jobs. They have taken them at lesser salary and they have driven that down. So with or without the higher minimum wage, the overall average wage will still be low for those on low skills.
Now,
that can't be good for them.
You've brought up immigration several times in this interview, though I haven't actually asked you about it. Isn't the blunt truth, because I was asking about the economics, you're losing the economic arguments. The polls show that. You're more and more dependent on scaring people about immigration. And let me show you what John Major thinks of that, former Conservative Prime Minister. He says, we get the quote up, it's pure demagoguery, and that such mischief-making, you should be embarrassed and ashamed at the misuse of this issue. What do you say?
Rubbish. Very simple. He's talking nonsense. This man, John Major, who, supported and everything else at the time, I have to say, he said only a few years ago that there was a real issue over immigration. The government had a target to get tens of thousands, the limit to immigration down to tens of thousands. We're not achieving that. We talked about it in the run to the election. The Prime Minister himself made a very strong immigration commitment that we would ensure that our borders, even with the EU, were protected against people just coming to be here. So it is utter nonsense because we are not raising this as an issue because we're trying to win the referendum. Most people in the country believe that there is an issue about the open border with the European Union. Why is it demagoguery? Why is it extremism to speak for British people who feel like their views are being tossed aside? If you don't do it, it's the extreme parties that get onto this and they become damaging.
Was it wise of Boris Johnson to compare the EU's ambitions for Europe to Hitler's?
Well, I read his article, actually. I thought it was a rather good article because he talked about this nonsensical idea of constantly trying to drive
But was
these
it wise
different
to compare it with Hitler?
Well, it's a historical fact of life that if you go through it, through Napoleon, through Hitler,
But do you think that Hitler's efforts to unify the Europe, and I put unify in his case in quotes, are the same as the European Union's efforts?
I think the whole process of trying to drive Europe together by force or by bureaucracy and democratic means ultimately makes problems, and that's all
it's not the kind of force. I mean, isn't this referendum getting vaguely absurd? We've had the Prime Minister kind of dangling the thought of World War III if we leave, and on your side we've got Boris Johnson now kind of saying Hitler and the European Union are on the same script. It's both nonsense, and you know that.
But all he's doing in the interview is he's talking about the trend towards the idea of this concept of some kind of greater Europe. That's all. Right. And he's using some historical parallels to explain it. As was said earlier on, the Habsburgs, the Holy Roman Empire. I mean, all you go through this great idea that somehow there is a thing called greater Europe. Now, whether or not you like the linguistics of this or whatever, my point remains the same, that if you vote to remain on the 23rd, you are voting, after all, the 12 presidents said that quite clearly, that they intend to deepen, drive on...
The 5 presidents.
5 presidents, rather. The 5 presidents report said you deepen and you're going to drive on to a centralised European state in which taxation, everything else will be decided by the centre.
I've got one more quick question for you. David Cameron and George Osborne, they won't debate other Tory ministers during the referendum, like yourself. Are they concerned about party unity? Are they right to do that, or are they just running scared?
Well, I think you're going to have to ask them. My view about it is it's right to have a proper open debate. And by not opening that debate, the British public will be left to wonder why they were not allowed to see the two opposing sides of the argument from what are the leading figures of it.
You would debate the Prime Minister?
I would. I've said already, I think that this is the right way to go. We need to get these things straight face to face. After all, if this was an election, would the Remain side be allowed to say, or would the Conservatives be allowed to say, we won't debate Ed Miliband, we won't debate no, they can't do that. The answer is there are two sides, maybe there are three in an election, but two sides in this argument. If two sides have to debate it, that's right and proper. They shouldn't be able to pick who they have against them. It should be down to impartiality that we have two sides, the two sets of leaders.
Iain Duncan Smith, thank you for being with us today.
Pleasure.
I've been getting